Hello, 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 and welcome to the Jolly Heretic. I have two very special guests for you today, and they are Mr. Richard Grannon, who all of you will know by now, my friend and colleague, and Mr. Mark Vicente, who is a filmmaker and has some very interesting research and stuff on the old films on cults. While I sided the old entropy, I'm going to ask Mark to introduce himself. So, Mark, over to you.
Thank you. So my name is Mark Vicente. I'm originally from South Africa. I've lived everywhere. I have an American accent now. I currently live in Portugal. So yes, I'm a filmmaker, been doing that for many years, but I also have the interesting distinction of having been in a cult that was rather famous called Nixium. And there was a 16-episode television show called The Vow, which was on HBO that chronicles my escape along with fellow whistleblowers, and then eventually the prosecution of the cult leader. And because I was in the cult for quite some time, I documented everything. A lot of that footage became the basis of the documentary. So there's a lot of insider video and phone calls and a whole bunch of fascinating things. And my cult leader, I say my loosely, is now sitting in prison in Arizona. He has a sentence of 120 years. So I say to people, I'm not an expert on cults, but I've definitely been screwed over. I do know how to spot them, and I know a thing or two about cult leaders.
Excellent. Well, cheers, everybody. So, cheers, Mark, Proust, and cheers, Richard, Hurrigan, Gulligan, Capis, Saludo, Skol, whatever it was in Russian. What was it in Russian?
Saud.
What?
Saúde.
Saúde, Salu, Slanjavar, and welcome to the Jolly Heretic. We are, of course, online public house. We'll be on Mondays at 7 p.m. UK time, 2 p.m. New York, in which we discuss based science, all kinds of interesting stuff that is increasingly expunged from our woke joke universities, and increasingly these days also the issue, of narcissism. We're getting and that kind of thing, and borderline personality. That we're getting quite into that, chaps. Now, I hope you've all got your drinks ready. I, of course, am on the usual Estonian ale, Ale Cock. So if you're interested in some nice beer, you want to get a cock down your throat, then I recommend this one. So cheers, and cheers to everybody that's watching on Odyssey, and cheers to everyone that's watching on Richard's channel as well. Hello, ladies. And cheers to the people watching on my channel. Hello, 90% gentlemen. If anybody could put you in the same room, I think you'd all pair off nicely. But Richard's not so sure about that. He's not so sure about that. Well, you wouldn't pair off nicely, but you'd pair off. Perhaps unwillingly. So for the sort of element of force. So cheers, everybody, and Russia loves Nigel, says Weasel 3001. Yes, I thought we were going to talk about Nigel. We're going to talk about the old Nigel. Now, I don't know. I'm drinking Guinness, says RCW. Okay, well, actually, we've got a poem. We've got a resident poet here at the Jolly Heretic Public House, which has been sent in by Mr. Quinn, who is our resident poet at Jolly Heretic Public House, with Richard, I think, met in London. And this is as follows. We welcome South African Mark to talk about this Farage lark. He's becoming a cult, but his ballot result will hit the ball right out the park. Thank you very much, Mr. Quinn. And if you would like to buy Mr. Quinn's book of Jolly Heretic poetry, then it is available on the old Amazon. And you can, of course, also subscribe to Mr. Quinn's channel, where he reads out. Of course, the poet is Irish, says Heidi. No, I believe Mr. Quinn is, I know Mr. Quinn, I've met him. He's from the home counties. So of Irish ancestry, though, surely, Quinn. But I think that's a while ago. Anyway, cheers, Mr. Quinn. Thank you for that.
Cheers, Quinn.
Good stuff.
Mr. Quinn, to you. Anyway,
Senor Quinn.
To those of you who are American, and also to Mark, who sounds a bit American, even though he's Afrikaans.
I do.
When he has the Afrikaans comes out. By the way, he's just done an interview with me on his channel, which is very interesting. So go and have a look at that. And I've got an interview with him, which will be coming out in about a month's time or something as well. We were in a studio in Liverpool. We met at a conference on narcissism, didn't we?
Indeed, we did. Arranged by Mr. Grannon, no less.
Arranged by Mr. Grannon there, and it went jolly well. And narcissism, and it was very good. It was very good. There was only one serious complaint, and that was because of me. It was absolutely fine. So
what happened to the silky smooth introductions that we were going to do? Where we were like, hello.
Oh yeah. I got bored of those. Sorry, I'll go back to those. Because I was interviewed by Darren on his channel, and it was all this kind of was speaking a very slow Irish kind of way, and sort of very slowly and calmly, and
Darren has the ability to calm everybody down the way he speaks.
What does openness mean, and what kind of family are involved with that? And just ask really about that kind of thing. Hello,
so he's a Jamaican Scouser, is he?
Yeah, he is. Yeah, well, no, that's true. They say that the Irish accent. My friend Lipton Matthews, who is Jamaican, says that the Jamaican accent is heavily influenced by the Irish accent.
Interesting.
So yeah.
So your impression was actually correct.
It was correct. No. If you want to do a stereotypical Northern Irish, you just sort of go like, that's a stereotypical Northern Irish. But we won't be doing that because we don't want to upset any of our Northern Irish viewers. Hello, any of our Northern Irish viewers, particularly if you're in Larne, where I went. But anyway, I was thinking about this whole issue of you were saying that you two you did a podcast on narcissistic psychopathy. And it seems to me that at the moment, England, or at least an element of England, much as how many years ago was it? 27 years ago, it was under the spell of the narcissistic psychopath Tony Blair. A slightly different component of England, it really wants it to be true that Nigel Farage, and perhaps he is genuine in some ways, isn't the stereotypical kind of leader, narcissist, subclinical psychopathic traits kind of person. And we almost, but he deep down, you know that he probably is, because that's the kind of person that becomes influential and sways you and intoxicates you, and as he is doing to a component of the British people. And I wondered, Mark's a bit of an outsider to this because he doesn't live in the UK. But if Richard, if you have any thoughts on what you're seeing so far in terms of the nature of the Farage effect.
The Farage effect. I will quote Nietzsche. Hope really is the worst of all things, for it prolongs the suffering of man. I see a lot of hopefulness here. And I don't know, Mr. Farage, but as me and Mark were discussing today, the reason why narcissistic psychopaths tend to rise to the top and become leaders is because the risks are so high, but also because the rewards are so high. It's a very, very unforgiving job these days. And I don't think, sorry to say to the people who are, lovers of Mr. Farage, I don't think it's non-naive enough to just assume that anybody who wants power wants it for good, wholesome reasons. They want to help their country, they want to help their community and so on. I think it's just incredibly unlikely at this moment in history, because there's really not that much anybody can do. I'm very, very pessimistic and fatalistic about this type of thing at this point. So I think it's evidence of, it's almost self-selecting for narcissistic psychopathy. Who else could be bothered to push their way through to the top of that monkey pyramid?
Yeah.
I was watching a little video of him today. I think it was on Sky News or Sky TV or whatever. He was on top of a bus, and in preparation for being on here. And I thought to myself, that's so interesting. He's very charismatic. He does give a lot of hope, as you say. But the other thing is the way he began his speech. There's a lot of very subtle love bombing in there.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, that's interesting. He like talking about the local town and how wonderful it is, and the usual sort of political thing. But I was struck by his charisma. The man is very, very charismatic. I was also struck by, and I have no way to scientifically divine this, but he seems to be feeding off the reaction he's getting from people in the crowd. And I thought, well, that's very interesting. Now, you could just say, well, that's just good statesmanship. That's just good being a good politician. But I am interested in the fervor that has been whipped up around him online. That's interesting.
Do you think that's planned? Do you think there's this feeling? Do you think there are sort of the idea, a left-wing paranoid person would say that there are dark forces that are deliberately promoting him, like Putin or whatever?
I mean, I don't know, because I think that a lot of things are promoted, whatever side they're on, just to create dissent. So I don't know, but what I do know is he's getting a lot of attention. Whether that's being promoted as well, I don't know. But I'm like Richard. I'm very suspicious now of anybody who's extremely charismatic and who people think is the answer to all the problems. And some people seem to think that he's suddenly the answer to everything. And I'm like, I'm not so sure about that.
What kind of vibes did you get? I mean, so you saw the love bombing. What were some examples of the love bombing?
Just the way he talked about the town. Now, I know a lot of politicians talk about how special this place is, but what they start to do is they start to talk about how amazing the constituents are, and how they really understand the issues and that kind of thing. And you could say, well, that's what politicians do, but no, not all human beings do that. I mean, this is somebody who seems to me very well practiced in working a crowd. And one of the first things you want to do and to disarm them and have them feel good is compliment them. And that happens in cults. I mean, when you go into a cult, you go into an abusive relationship with a narcissist. I mean, you get love bombed. In a cult, it's the same thing. You get heavily love bombed in the beginning, and you start to experience this kind of elation that you're finally being recognized for the truth of who you are. And my concern is that I see politicians do exactly the same thing, and then people get behind them no matter what they're actually doing.
But normally though, if we're talking about, I mean, if you're going to make that, what is that, Richard? That looks yellow and strange.
Gin and tonic, my dear.
Gin and tonic, lovely. There was some lovely strawberry gin I'd had recently. It's very nice. Well, cheers to that. But there often though, what you find though with these people that have borderline personality or narcissism or whatever, because it's false, is there are little tells, little things that are a bit off. They're just a bit off. That are a bit disingenuous, but you're so inebriated by them that you're prepared to look over them in that love bombing stage.
Yes.
But they're there.
Yes.
And I wonder, do you pick up on anything like that?
I haven't dug deeply enough, but I see the fervor that people have. I see that people. Maybe it's people. I haven't dug deeply enough, but it seems like people on the right seem to think that this is the answer. This man is the answer. And whenever that happens, I mean, you can think of so many politicians that have suddenly emerged. Not that he's suddenly emerged, but emerge onto the stage, and this is the answer. And what cult leaders do is cult leaders figure out what's the deficit that the people are feeling, and if the cult leader knows what the deficit is, then the cult leader will speak to the deficit. That seems to me to be what's happening to some degree. There's serious problems in the world right now. It seems to me he's addressing some of those things. I even saw somebody that on some other news thing, GB it was, that said, look, I don't like him, but I agree with what he's saying. So I do think that he or the people around him, as many do, have studied, well, what is the deficit? What's the thing that people are feeling that can be capitalized on? Because if you can address their deficit, recognize it so that they feel heard, and then provide them with a solution, or give them, well, this will answer it. And usually the answer is me. I am the answer. That's what they usually do.
And also, I suppose it's interesting in terms of, I don't know what you think about this, Richard. I don't want to leave you out there not talking. But the Weberian notion of the charismatic, the Max Weber's charismatic, in a time where there is not a lot of unhappiness and not a feeling of crisis, and there is a feeling of crisis in the UK, massive amounts of immigration. Nobody can afford a bloody house in London. You've got all these poor bloody students that have been sold a load of crap and have got these useless degrees. Prices are going up, whatever. There's a general feeling that things are not good. Things used to be better, which of course they did. And that person, when it's not a crisis, is considered an eccentric, a nutcase. Just a sort of a bit of a joke, and that's very much how Farage was considered sort of 30 years ago, or 25 years ago with UKIP. He was just considered a bit of funny chap. We'll vote for him in European elections, but there was no where it doesn't really matter. But there's no serious question of voting for him in elections that actually matter, and there is this sort of feeling that people are so despondent about the Conservative Party that they just don't care, and they know Labour is just going to be the Conservative Party but worse, and they just don't care anymore. They've got no hope, so they might as well just vote for Farage. And that wouldn't have been the perception in, let's say, the 2001 election or whatever, when the Conservative Party was seen as useless. But it seems that there's a growing perception of that now. So the people, Farage hasn't changed. It's the society that's changed, and that's moved him from being an eccentric to being a charismatic.
Whose hypothesis was that again, please?
Max Weber.
Weber.
W-E-B-E-R, as in the Protestant
Not
worship.
Darth Vader, Richard. Not Darth Vader.
Damn
as,
it.
as in the Protestant work ethic, the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism. Max Weber,
So
sociology.
the idea being that in normal times, somebody like him would be an eccentric sideshow, but in times of crisis, because people are so desperate, there's so much deficit, as Mark referenced, that somebody who actually is a bit pathological, we're so desperate, we're willing to engage in their fantasy. We're willing to join them in their pathological fantasy. That's a really interesting way of looking at it. There's some airy-fairy psychoanalytic theory I'd like to offer you, Professor Dutton, because I know you love airy-fairy psychoanalytic theory. When I was talking to Mark today, we were talking about cults spontaneously forming around pathological leaders, and I'm not saying Nigel Farage is pathological or he has a PD. I've really no idea. But just to follow on from your very interesting point from Weber there is a fantasy element required for narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder to play through. And they have a very, very heavily delusional fantasy life. Fantasy, for people who aren't familiar with psychoanalytic theory, in this, the way it's talked about in psychoanalytic theory, it's almost like an organizing narrative rather than just a daydream or a sexual fixation. So the fantasy in that sense, but the fantasy needs to activate the pre-existing traumatized introjects of the people who are listening to it. So I think that's what Farage is doing well, is he's offering a fantasy-based narrative that energizes people, it energizes the traumatized parts of themselves to say, yes, let's go along with this, so that this part of me is getting its needs met, is getting its hungers met. And it's a really good way of getting people to take action. I actually think he's going to do very well in this election because of this effect specifically.
Yeah, I suppose at the individual level, a person who is, everything's kind of okay in their life and they're ultimately reasonably satisfied is probably not going to find themselves getting into a relationship with a narcissist. They will see the signs. They will know that this is ridiculous. They will see them. It's like the charismatic, like Weber's charismatic. They will just see them as a weird eccentric. Best stay away from them. But it's when that person has some unresolved unhappiness that they can't quite articulate, that's when the narcissist goes from being a fucking weirdo oddball to being the savior of my life. Oh my God, everything's leading up to this, and it's the same with him.
It's the same, and I think this is a really useful way of framing it. Is to say, okay, the Farage is the content, and he has his story, and he has his narrative, and it would be very easy to pin things on him. But if we pull back and look at the context, when Mark's saying deficit, it could be grief, it could be the fact that you've just arrived in a new city and you don't know anybody, you've lost a parent, you've lost a relationship, your money situation sucks. It's another way of saying the person or the country or the culture is in a crisis. And that's the moment of vulnerability. And we normally say of vulnerability to the pathological person, but it's actually vulnerability to the pathological narrative, which is this fantasy space.
Yeah, the narrative of which that person centralizes he or herself.
Yes. Exactly.
As that it's all been leading up to this, and that this is perfect, and things could only get better, or whatever it happens to be. Yeah. So that's that's it. So that's the circumstances we're in, and it would presumably there would be a series of coincidences that have helped to bring about those circumstances, like in a normal frame of mind. When you hadn't had all these things that have come together, like a trauma, like a person, it's their relationship has broken down, their dad's died, they've lost their house, all these things come together, and that's when they're open to. Yes, Mark.
I think there's something interesting though, because we talk about people that are vulnerable to cults and cult leaders and these kinds of personality as going through something in their life. There's something going on, but my thought at the moment is that globally, we've been put into a state of trauma. So where most people would normally be at a baseline that's okay, everybody's been put into a deep kind of trauma. There's massive financial crisis. You watch the news and you start to feel crazy. Like there's so many conflicting things going on. And one of the things I was looking at recently was an excerpt from the CIA interrogation manual. And what they talk about is breaking a person down so much, and until they start to lose their sense of identity, they start to feel crazy. And in that place, you can then coalesce them around a new idea, a new narrative, a new identity. And so I see what's happening in a global way right now is there's so much crisis, there's so much instability. So people that normally would have felt stable are now feeling unstable. So it's worse than to me, it seems worse than it's ever been. Now what happens is you come in with somebody who's very confident. And the one thing that I can tell you, this is just about the content, but generally the process as well. When somebody comes in who's so confident and so clear, and you're in a state of crisis, you hold on to that because it seems like absolute certainty and seems like that's a strong foundation. And Richard and I were talking today about, most normal people in a place of leadership, normal people, neurotypical, have doubts. Am I capable of this? Is this the right decision? What if I do this? What if I do that? These people, whether they be strong men or strong women, have not a single fucking doubt. And that to me is always a red flag. And so when I see, I didn't see much, but the things I've seen about Farage, for instance, there's many people, not just him. There's a level of confidence that they seem like unperturbed by anything. They have their mission, they have the ideology, they seem so secure. And then you put that together with people who are generally in a state of deficit, much more maybe than they have been ever before in their life. And it's a recipe for, cult-like attraction.
I'm not sure that Farage is as extreme though as someone that has no doubt, as someone maybe like Trump, or I don't know who would be a good example of someone that has a legal cult leader who has no doubt. I've met him, and he just seems like just the stereotype, exactly like he comes across on TV, like just the jolly bon vivant. So like I've not met Boris Johnson, but I guess like Boris Johnson, is there depth to such a person? Probably there is. He's probably highly intelligent and thoughtful, but what he wants to come across as is this jolly chap who is pleasure, jolly good, and that's and then he dresses, he adopts this persona of the English gent, dresses in tweed, and which I have every sympathy for. The probably is. I mean, if we look at the details of the studies on what creates these charismatic men or these great men, and there was a study I referenced again and again by Felix Post, which looked at 291 of them, and you get certain traits which are overrepresented in them, and this helps to create. This seems to create that kind of character, and also part of it's just heritable traits. But basically, these people have low impulse control. They have low agreeableness, or at least they have low altruism. They have high, and this makes them stand up against the grain, go against the grain and be brave and whatever, like he is. I mean, he's been cancelled. He was debanked by Coutts Bank, for example. That's how much of a threat they see him as. Wow. And all kinds of stuff. When there was a political party called the BNP, which was popular about 15 years ago, they wanted to neutralise them. They saw them as a real threat to Labour because they took working class votes, British National Party. So then they would promote Farage, and you'd see him on Question Time all the time. And then once that party was eliminated, once that was dealt with, then the new enemy was Farage. And so, of course, they and his group, so they turned on him. But he has those traits of charisma. So one of them was that you have some kind of unpleasant childhood, which would then be consistent with creating a narcissistic false self or whatever, which would be powerful and intoxicating to people. His father walked out on the family when he was 5. His father was an alcoholic. His father was a city trader who just had a breakdown and packed it all in and started running an antique shop, and then eventually got back into city trading. Farage himself went to private school, whatever, could have gone to university. No, he didn't want to do that. Too much into risk and reward and whatever. Just went into the city, trading and so forth. Takes risks clearly. For example, in 2010, he was contesting Buckingham, and the plane he'd hired to fly over the constituency with a banner got entangled with the banner and crashed, and he only just survived. Divorced, two failed marriages. So he seems to be that type, and it's certainly interesting. A traumatic sort of, it seems to be a traumatic background. Father's an alcoholic, walks up the family at 5, and that came up again and again with these great men. That something like the father walking out on the family, or dying when you're quite young, is something which a traumatic event when you're malleable, combined with perhaps the genetics as well, and that's what we see. And I think we see that perhaps with him.
I mentioned, I'm sorry to do this. It's reductio ad Hitlerum. You have these conversations, and sorry, I have to. Sorry. We were talking about Hitler's youth, World War One, has a psychotic breakdown, gets hysterical blindness, and then I just started to wonder if after that he was. I'm not comparing Farage to Hitler. I'm just talking more broadly about the subject. That he was happy to be a vessel for the fantasies and the resentments of the German people, and that really then it was just a case of just pushing the right buttons to activate those superego, the introjects, to get people motivated to do something with very little care or concern for what the consequences would be of taking such a huge risk. The other thing that Mark mentioned that I thought I'd just expand on a little bit was the CIA interrogation techniques. One of them is called the Alice in Wonderland technique. And you put 5 interrogators in the room to interrogate one person, and they all speak at a different pace about interrelated things and question the subject on non-related subjects to generate huge confusion. And apparently after a few days this generates like a state of psychosis in the person being interrogated. And I would just compare that to the culture that we live in now, with all the podcasts, with all of the news stations, with all of the information that's coming at us. We have to interject in order to understand all of these different perspectives that are high energy, some of them quite hysterical, quite emotive. And I think it ends up becoming our consumption of media becomes a de facto Alice in Wonderland technique that we almost subject ourselves to, which then leaves us far too open to somebody coming along, as Mark said, and offering that certainty, offering that smooth confidence, that lack of doubt, because we're riddled with it. We're riddled with doubt. We're riddled with cognitive dissonance, and it's very painful, and we just want it to stop. Somebody comes along and says, go on, sorry.
So why is it called the Alice in Wonderland technique?
I think because of, I would have thought because of the confusion.
Maybe the dreamlike state that you get put into.
And she spoke to multiple characters who were doing multiple things at the same time. They were supposed to be leading her, but oftentimes we didn't really know what their intentions were. Sometimes the intentions were sincere and sometimes they were not. And she was confused, I would think.
No, that's a very interesting point, because I suppose for most of our history, and certainly for most of our lives as people that are not, born in Generation Z, there was basically just one narrative, and you couldn't get hold of alternative narratives. You had to put in to the mainstream narrative, other than the slight divide that you'd have between what the left was saying and what the right was saying. To get extremist narratives, you had to make serious effort.
Oh God,
and people like I don't know, the far right or the far left, they didn't have podcasts and any way to communicate with people other than magazines read by a few hundred people that barely covered their printing costs, and they'd have to resort to putting up posters putting up stickers on lampposts and putting up posters in parks illicitly, in the hope that you might read. They had no way of communicating with people at all.
And if you take that slider backwards through the timeline, the more conformist the dominant narrative would be. I mean, just take it back to what there would have been in World War II inside of the UK. What would we have known? And when you're talking about dissident voices, they could have only come from the Houses of Parliament, and you'd only know if you heard it on the radio or if it was in one of the 3 major newspapers.
I suppose you had more people would go to church, and so you might have dissenting preachers. You'd have preachers that would preach in public, things like this. So I suppose there were slightly more complicated than that, but and also there'd be quite more pronounced regional differences in opinion, perhaps in viewpoint, because people wouldn't have.
But in terms of in terms of the stress it can induce and the cognitive dissonance it would induce, you'd have to actively want it. You'd have to be like, I'm going to go and find the dissident voice. I'm going to go and do this. And it would burn calories. You'd have to leave your house to do it. Now you just pull out the mind control mirror and it'll feed you whatever horror you want to hear.
I mean, the effects of Luther with printing. Well, indeed. The effect of Luther with printing and the way that suddenly you could spread these messages like you know, with these pamphlets and whatever. What the effect it had on Germany was we know it was a revolution. That was what happened in the German states and other states because of the rise of printing and then the translation of the Bible. And Mark's holding up the iPhone. And yeah, it's been argued that the idea that you go from, even if I think about 25 years ago, if you wanted to check something when I was at university, let's say, you'd have to go in person to the room where the internet was. On campus, because there was nothing in your bedrooms, and you'd have to check. Now you have all the world's information on your phone and the possibility of all these dissenting voices all the time, and there's just nothing is black and white, which is awful for a lot of people.
I have this question which might derail your direction, Professor, but I mean, I was thinking to myself, you know, how do we know the difference between the kind of pathology we've been talking about thus far to somebody that is very impassioned and wants to lead the world to a better place? I don't know anymore how to distinguish the difference, because there are people that have presented themselves that way as good people and they're wearing a mask. So I was wondering if you gentlemen have any thoughts, like, how do you tell the difference between somebody that really has morality, has conscience, has empathy, really cares, is very driven, versus the kind of thing we're talking about? Because I don't know.
I suppose if there were such people, I don't think there is. The cynic in me would say no.
There isn't. There isn't. We're screwed. We're screwed. You'd have to pull them into a clinic. You'd have to have a clinical examination.
Yeah.
And if they don't consent to it and they just schmooze you and they fawn to you and they charm the therapist, what are you going to get? I mean, it would be very, very difficult to say, okay, these are the things that we should look out for without it becoming a bit silly and naive. Like, what's the evidence of lying? What's the evidence of criminal behavior? What's the evidence of Machiavellianism? But we're talking about politicians. I mean, like,
but the thing is,
should that disqualify somebody? I don't actually think it should disqualify a politician. Perhaps that's
the thing is, I share your perspective as well, which is, I think cynicism is better. But I do recognize there's a part of me that wants it to be the case that there is somebody or a few people that genuinely care. I don't think there are, but I want there to be.
Yeah, we want there to be. That's the kind of like the man that wants his obviously BPD girlfriend to be genuine, and she's not, and she's going to destroy him. And it's just the same on a national level. I suppose you could say, what's the difference between trait? I mean, it's more Richard's area than mine, but the difference between trait narcissism and narcissistic personality disorder. So the difference, I don't know, how can we put this? The difference between subclinical narcissism and narcissism, subclinical psychopathology, or not even subclinical psychopathology, aspects of psychopathology, subclinical psychopathology, and that would be the difference. And so presumably there are all politicians must have aspects, surely, of subclinical narcissism. But then there'd be this optimum balance where some of them would be basically reasonably nice people, and genuine people. And empathetic. There was one of the subsections of one of the kinds of psychopath. The one, I forget which one it was. I think it's the one where it's more environmentally mediated than genetically mediated. And they are capable of things like regret and a certain
you know, I was just thinking about another thing. I have a number of friends who are filmmakers who went on campaign trails with politicians, with leaders. You know, some of those leaders have become presidents of one particular country. And what was so interesting is what they saw behind closed doors when the person wasn't on stage or being on. What my filmmaker friends saw made them walk away from that particular political party. A number of people have had this experience because as they spend time on the campaign trail, you get to see the mask and what's behind the mask. And many of them have become very disillusioned. So I think that's another way to tell, what are they like behind closed doors when they think no one's looking?
Yes, I mean, for example, I met a chap in a pub in Oxfordshire called, and he said to me that he used to work with a photographer and that he'd worked with Joe Biden, and he was convinced that Joe Biden, this whole thing about being senile, is a mask. He said, no, that's not. He's not like that in private. In public, he's this doddering, senile person because he thinks that people like it, and he's the friendly uncle and whatever, and they have sympathy for him. In private, he's not like that at all. He's an extremely nasty person. He's extremely intelligent. He knows exactly what's going on. The whole thing about the being senile is a front. That's what he. I don't know if he's telling the truth. That's what he said. This guy, the only person I know that claims to have met Biden.
Richard is like, what?
Well, you can see how there's something endearing about it. People think, oh, he's this friendly, lovable uncle with dementia. Isn't he nice?
You've heard the theories. That is the but you've heard the theories about they take different clones out, right? There's a theory that is going on about that. Didn't know we had cloning yet. Richard's like, what?
We cloned a sheep.
Can we clone a Biden? Should we clone a Biden?
Maybe we could clone a Biden, but presumably, I mean, sheep, I mean, they're much less environmentally sensitive. I can't see that a particularly different kind of field is going to induce a very different personality in a sheep. Whereas I can imagine a human it might, because we're more environmentally sensitive. So it's difficult to say. So we got off topic here, but I forget what we were.
I think I derailed us into but there could be good people, maybe. No.
I mean, that's it.
Go on. Sorry.
No, yeah. The question is, are there any genuine people that go into politics? I mean, that's basically probably there are, but something tells me that they don't reach the very top.
I think they get destroyed as well. I think there's some people that go in with goodwill. I think they get absolutely destroyed.
I just don't think they reach the very top. I mean, one chap that I got chatting to quite a bit when I was at university. His daughter was at the same university as me. Was a chap called Teddy Taylor, who was in Mrs. Thatcher's shadow cabinet in the 70s, and then lost his seat. And then in the 80s, he was a prominent backbencher and anti-European. And he seems to be lovely, friendly, jolly, genuine Scottish man. But he never got right to the top, and maybe that's it. Maybe it's the ones that get right to the top that have the steeliness to get to the top. I don't know. I mean, David Cameron doesn't come across as having much in the way of subclinical psychopathology, from what I know of him, from reading about his life. He doesn't come across like that.
Of being MPD.
Of being anything like that, no. Whereas Boris obviously does. You can see it with Boris. That's quite clear. But with Cameron or Theresa May or whatever, I don't think so.
Is there any evidence with Farage that he's disconnected from reality and just living inside of a grandiose fantasy?
Not really. I mean, the only thing
I wouldn't say so.
No, that's what's interesting with Farage is as I say, you obviously, and this isn't talked about much. It's not talked about much in public. You have to make the effort to read his two memoirs to read about this. Is that obviously his father walking out on the family when he's 5 years old and being an alcoholic and not have much to do with his dad at formative ages is the kind of thing that would bring about that kind of response to the world, some kind of response to the world like that. And then obviously maybe it's too old for it to matter, but at 21 I would think it's extremely traumatic to have cancer and survive it and whatever. That's a very traumatic thing to have to go through. And he does write about that, about how frightening it was, and how to this day, he's scared that the big C will come back and get him. And obviously he's a risk taker. That the whole nature of going into the city in the 80s as he did is consistent, and being a dissident to some extent as well. So he's a risk taker, and he's got 2 failed marriages, which implies a fast life history strategy. but it's nothing like as extreme as what we know of Boris, which is, sort of, he doesn't even know how many children he has.
You mean Boris, time to go to the front and fight, chaps? Johnson?
Boris Johnson, yeah. So I
Hmm.
think he doesn't. He's all over the. I think he's much more.
I think he's completely disconnected from reality. Completely.
I also wondered, when we mentioned before, is there evidence of a sincere care for the country, for the nation, for the community? I don't want to get this horribly wrong, but I kind of got the feeling with Farage that there is a genuine, authentic feeling of care, and that would lead me to wonder if there's something in the trait narcissism that he has that's actually adaptive. It's actually going to be adapted to the environment. Perhaps seeing his father leave, perhaps developing cancer, leads him to have a sense that, well, everything isn't just going to work out okay. Sometimes things go really badly wrong, and if I don't do something, nobody's going to do anything. I'm not defending Farage. I'm not a Farage fan. I'm just wondering if there could be evidence that actually there's a sincere sense of, well, no, the country really could go to a very bad place, and he lacks that naivety that protects other people. No, it's always been fine. It always will be fine. It couldn't get really bad. And he's had experiences that make him think, no, things can break. Things can break, and they break forever. I need to do something about this.
Yeah, it's very possible. I think he might have seen that in his own party as well, because the UK Independence Party, without him personally, just collapsed into chaos. Electing leader after leader, and just completely fell apart without him. And then he gets the 8 years ago. God, it was 8 years ago. He gets the vote to leave the EU, and then he says, "Okay, well, I'm going to retire now. I want my life back." And then without him, there's all these attempts to subvert Brexit and to stop it from happening, and to just ignore the wishes of the British people. And so he thinks, "I better come back in."
So as disparaging as we were in the front part of the conversation about leaders and leadership and people who are pathological and they want power, we should also add to that leadership is incredibly important. And there's numerous examples where you take out a single person, one personality that's holding it all together, and yeah, it just does fall apart, because perhaps it's nature, perhaps it's biological or genetic. Most people aren't really cut out for it. They just aren't. And they think that they are. They take the responsibility and they fumble the ball.
Yeah, and the kind of leaders I like are the ones that don't want the job. Those are the leaders that I tend to enjoy. Like I think about different situations in my life when I feel like I have to step up. I don't want to step up, but I do. But it's the people that don't want the job. I'm like, yeah, they probably would do a good job.
Yes, there is always going to be a suspicion about people who are pushing themselves forward, that they just want the power. But we should allow for the possibility of sincerity as well. There could just be, there are genuine idealists. You're a genuine idealist. I think anybody who can get caught up in cults, it's as you've always said, you didn't want to join a cult. You wanted to join a group of people with a shared vision for a common objective that was positive for humanity, which is, it's not politics, but it's adjacent to why people get involved in political movements, I think.
It is. Where did Ed go?
He had an internet problem, and I think it might be because his son is playing games online, so he's probably going to give him a damn good thrashing.
Thrashing.
He's gone now.
Oh my goodness.
This happened before. So 2 weeks ago, I took over the Jolly Heretic pub for about 8 very awkward minutes whilst.
Oh, really?
Yes.
There was something actually, just to loop back to the podcast we were doing this morning for my channel. I was thinking about when I was in the cult, first of all, I wanted to make the world better and yada, yada, yada. But I was also thinking to myself, there was a period of time I wanted to improve things inside the organization that I saw as problematic. This is way before I realized that I was, dealing with a narcissistic psychopath. But I really wanted to fix things, and I couldn't figure out why everything wasn't working. I didn't understand he was the one scuttling things all the time, but I genuinely thought if I could just put my best foot forward, I could somehow make a difference. And the other thing I was thinking about is that when the reason I think I understand more now how politics works is because if I take my cult, everybody was bumbling around. Nobody knew what the fuck was going on. And like the leader was just creating chaos. And I realized once I left that that's probably how most things run. You know, to your point this morning of like, you know, either there's some great grand conspiracy of people that have mapped everything out for the next 1,000 years, you know, or it's just a bunch of people that are reactive in the moment, decision makers, freaked out, drunk, high, whatever, that are making awful decisions. And I now lean more towards that because I saw what happened inside the cult, especially when there's a crisis. It was chaos. And I'm beginning to look at the political landscape the same way. And I'm thinking, I think it's fucking chaos. The fact that we're embarking on a war, that there's, you know, Russian subs showing up off the coast of Florida, and all the people that should be, you know, figuring shit out and being reasonable, like, fuck it, let's go to war. I'm like, are you people insane? Anyway, I digress. Yeah. Professor, we were just yakking.
I went off there. My son plays this game with his friends from school called Minecraft, and I don't know why, apropos of nothing, it just shuts the internet down every so often. And it's happened twice today, and then I had to unplug the internet and plug it back in again, and then it's fine. And he says, I've done nothing, but he's surely doing something to do with vast levels of data. I don't know. Which when you look at it, he's just playing Minecraft. Nigel Farage, of course, has done a Minecraft commentary. They're very popular. So I don't know if I should do one. But yes, I suppose there could be a genuineness to Farage. The jury is out. One thing he hasn't done, which would be consistent with the positive argument that he is genuine, is that he apparently was offered things like seats in the House of Lords for him and his cronies. And other kinds of deals, and he has turned those down. So it's not a status thing. It's not a financial thing. But on the other hand, to use Richard's Hitler reductio ad Hitlerum thing, you can imagine Hitler would turn down all kinds of stuff, and so that doesn't necessarily follow. One thing that it would be a possibility, you know, you say that with these cult or Hitler or whatever, you just lead things to hell, you lead things to chaos, you know. Well, that's because it's an outworking of your own insecurities and your own various problems, and so that's what politics is for you. It's a way of outworking, of dealing with those various problems, and so why shouldn't it lead to chaos?
This is Mark's field. So at the center of every cult, what Mark taught me is pathology. There's a pathological person, and then the people who are in the cult or within the political party or followers of the political party, they sort of inherit the pathology of the leader and start playing the pathology out quite unconsciously. It's terrifying. It's a terrifying element of human psychology that it all plays out totally unconsciously. If the leader is hypersensitive about an issue, you become hypersensitive about an issue. If the leader is incredibly envious or jealous, you become envious and jealous, and you effectively become a flying monkey of the narcissistic psychopathic leader because you've engaged in this covert contract with them. You're not aware of it, and you're playing in the fantasy space. And yeah, I think it's what we've seen happen historically. I mean, the same case with Stalin. You're seeing an individual's paranoia and rigidity and violence then play out amongst the collective with potentially disastrous results. And yeah, it's the collapse, I suppose, is inevitable because, as you said, it's maladaptive. It's a pathology.
Seen though in the 30s, people that were the sensible people, the conservatives, or even the sensible SDP, Schleicher or von Papen or whatever, and they could see helplessly as the whole country was sucked into this guy's fantasy, that there's this massive conspiracy run by the Jews and to destroy Germany and all this, and if only we could deal with it, then we could be a great nation again, and there'll be 1,000-year Reich. And they just watched the sensible, logical, but albeit quite conformist in some ways people, the less histrionic people would watch in horror, and as we are watching now with some things.
So then the question was asked before, how can we detect this? Do we see utopianism with Farage? Is he saying, brothers and sisters, we just need to do this, this, and this? Just over that hill is the promised land. Or is he fairly grounded and realistic?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. You don't see utopianism, do you?
Mm.
But then you didn't see utopianism with Nick Griffin or whatever either. I mean, I don't know when in British with Blair. I think you did. The whole idea of things can only get better. It's this glib thing. If you actually mean it, then that is utopia. That if you mean anything of that, then that is utopianism. That was utopianist, I think, and that was a narcissism, and we were sucked in by it.
There's also another aspect as well. Does the leader sort of parentify themselves and have people believe that they're a parent, and they think they're not utopian? They're like, things are going to be hard, but I'll be here with you every step of the way, blah, 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 activating that very primitive thing in people. I think that's another warning sign as well.
Yeah, with Trump, I mean, that's obvious utopianism. And with Obama as well, the whole way he presented himself was, yes, we can. It was just a load of slogans that made people feel good. And that about the future. Oh, it can be better. Yes, we can. That's utopianism. Yes, we can do injustice. Yes, we can poverty. That's utopianism.
I was frightened when I heard that slogan come out, because when I was teaching in schools and I was dealing with frightened, emotionally dysregulated 15 and 16-year-olds, that was a slogan that I developed for them. Just blind positivity and optimism in the face of chaos. Yes, I can. Yes, we can. And then, God, it was only 3 or 4 years later that I watched Obama get on stage and there was these posters. And I think the slogan was just, yes, we can. And I was like, what? That doesn't mean anything. That's what you say to kids to give them hope, to get them through school. It's not what you tell a country of adults. So yeah, that's a good example.
You don't tell a country of adults. Our policies are education, education, education. What the fuck does that mean?
What does it mean?
What does it mean? It doesn't mean anything. It's just repeating a word twice. And there was that film with Judi Dench about what was that philosopher called? That woman, oh God, what was her name? That novelist.
Ayn Rand?
No, British woman. Oh God, I can't remember. She went senile in the end. Anyway, Iris Murdoch. She Iris Murdoch, and she heard that and she said, "What does it mean? What on earth does it mean?" But that's the thing, that was the shallow level of discourse that we got to. That this smiling Cheshire Cat man who didn't believe in anything, that had gone from being conservative to being socialist to being New Labour, has changed. And you should never trust people that say they've changed. You don't change. I knew this guy in Oulu, and he was a raving Nazi, like a LARPing, ridiculous Nazi. And surprise, surprise, these days he's very, very left-wing and an anti-Nazi. Oh, how predictable. And obviously that's consistent with, I don't know, borderline personality or whatever, mental breakdown. And when I met him years ago, he said, I guess it means some people can change. And I said to him, no, you haven't changed. You've gone from one set of very extreme, wacky ideas that give you a sense of importance, and to another set of wacky ideas, that extreme ideas that do exactly the same thing. You're the same person.
And it's the same. The context, the framework, the matrix hasn't changed. Only the content has changed. So it's just an ideological flip-flop. Weird ideology over here replaced by new weird ideology. One of the weird ideological coordinates when we were just talking about history there was the identification with country. So Stalin, the motherland, Hitler, the fatherland. Once the person becomes the people, becomes the country, that I think we can say is highly pathological. And we're not seeing it with Farage. I don't think we've seen it with many modern politicians. But if we were trying to create a yardstick, that would be one of the red flags. Does the politician in this weird religious grandiose way think they've become Russia? Like, if you do this to me, you do it to Russia. If I'm under threat, it is Russia that is under, or wherever it is. I think the identification with the country and being that parental figure, that's a similar delusional grandiosity to watch out for.
You had that with Finland. You had this idea that Urho Kekkonen in the 70s and the 80s was the only person that was able to negotiate with the Soviet Union and keep Finland independent, and therefore he must stay in power, and therefore he did. and if everything was done to keep him in power. He's an autocrat. And not too simplistic to say dictator, but kind of basic, kind of. And the identification with Finland, and he was the doctor, the medic who could stand outside east and west and notice the details of what had to be done. Yeah. So I don't think you have that with Farage, and so this militates in favour. This puts us back round to our argument that he may actually be a genuine person. Although the ones that came across as genuine, even they've had feet of clay. Like, I always used to think that even though I disagree with him, I think that Tony Benn is genuine. Then it turned out that he had loads of money and he made sure there were all kinds of schemes to keep his family rich.
I didn't know that. That's disappointing.
Yeah, exactly, despite his avowed socialism. So he's not genuine. I don't know whether Jeremy Corbyn. He seems to stick to his guns on things. So maybe he would be. I don't know.
I mean, I think the problem is some of these people, they can run this grift for a very long time. Like my cult leader ran his grift for over 25 years. And he seemed so humble, and he was so covert and so vulnerable. And I mean, he created an entire system around him of coercion, but it never seemed like he was doing the coercion. So I think one of the issues is you can't tell sometimes, because some of these people play the long game, and I mean very long. That's why it leaves me with like, it's hard to tell. I'm still with behind closed doors, because they can't keep the act up like all the time.
Yeah, behind closed doors.
I think that's one of the issues, and maybe so far in the discussion we've missed it, of course, is the culture that we live in is so psychologized. People are so media trained. I mean, you'll have like an 18-year-old cousin who's effectively, or nephew or niece who's effectively media trained through their use of TikTok, their use of Instagram. People are far more aware of their public image. So all it would do is drive the covert elements of the narcissism forward. Nobody's going to say the things that imperialists and totalitarians used to say, because we've heard it. But nobody's that stupid to come out and say it. I did say this to you a couple of weeks, a couple of podcasts ago, Ed. The culture has changed where you can't say I have a will to move the country forward and to express yourself in these sorts of terms, because it just isn't a la mode. It's not acceptable to talk like that anymore. And maybe we should be careful that if we see somebody who isn't talking like that, it's because they're perfectly well aware. They're perfectly intelligent enough to know that that's not going to work out very well for them. And so they just choose not to.
So really the honest person, the genuine person, would stand up and say, I'm going to invade the Republic of Ireland and conquer France and just
they deserve it.
Rebuild the British Empire back to what it was. I'm going to do that.
I've never said anything else, Ed. I'm
going to install a proper British government in South Africa. Sort that out. There'll be no load shedding when I'm in charge.
See.
And it's a genuine thing. So that would be, people would know that I meant it, because it would be so outrageous. And it would be so antithetical to helping you to get power. But
that's right. And that's the thing, is like some people say things that are so outrageous, and people go like, well, he says what he means. He says what all of us are thinking. It's so seductive, isn't it? It's so seductive.
But I though, I'm different. I say what we're all thinking, and I genuinely mean it. So it's
this is the key element, Mark, with Professor Dutton, is out of everyone else, he's the one person who really means it, and that's why we should all place our faith.
Exactly, I'm like Jesus in that respect.
I was going to say Jesus, actually. Yeah.
I'm not saying I am Jesus.
No, of course you wouldn't.
No, like Jesus with a cravat, Jesus.
That is for others to say.
Yes.
But if I was Jesus, then this is the kind of podcast I'd be on, isn't it? With
yes,
drunks and narcissists.
Exactly. You would be with the prostitutes.
Yes,
the people with
Finland. Is the kind of country. Finland is the.
I just want to know.
Finland is the kind of country I'd be in, isn't it?
Who's the prostitute in this call?
a modest, humble place.
Cheers.
Drunks and whores, and that's where I'd be. And I am. That's the kind of place I would be, and I am. But no, I'm not saying I'm Jesus. Not in the current.
That's exactly what the Messiah would say.
Yes.
That is. What kind of chance does that give me? Okay, I am the Messiah.
Yeah.
Fair enough then.
And maybe Nigel Farage should just come out and be honest and just say, that he is the new Messiah, that he's been kept special. That's why he was never elected an MP. He was being kept special for his ultimate triumph on the 4th of July.
Role. He didn't want a lesser role. He wanted the throne.
He wanted he had like Aslan, and then he swept across the land, and the snow melted, and Father Christmas came, and the beavers, and I don't know. Mark, have you heard of the Chronicles of Narnia? Do they have those in South Africa?
I've heard of them. I don't think I've actually seen. I don't think I've seen it. There's some things I don't read or watch just because Reddit. Okay, Reddit. But didn't they make a thing of it as well? A visual portrayal.
They've made various films of it, and a very good 1980s TV series.
No, I'm not that familiar.
In British schools, this was forced upon us. We had no choice. We had to do the Chronicles of Narnia.
Chronicles of Narnia.
This was like in the pre-Harry Potter days. It was Roald Dahl and C.S. Lewis. That was what you had.
That was what we got.
Yes, I was familiar with that. Yes,
those were your books. And then they brought in all this Harry Potter nonsense, and now kids don't read. Yeah, it's dreadful rubbish.
I love Harry Potter. I love Harry Potter. I love it.
Well, you shouldn't.
Well,
because it's degenerate. It's a weird, contradictory, schizophrenic worldview, whereby on the one hand this woman is very left wing and she's promoting the underdog and all this stuff, but on the other hand she's fetishizing the public school system, which she's obviously never been through, or she wouldn't fetishize it.
She wouldn't fetishize it because it's a fucking nightmare.
Right. So she said, "Oh, the public school. Oh, they all go to public school." Like, so basically, she's fetishizing the system, like rich kids and whatever. And yet at the same time, she's on the side of the kid that's got in by hereditary right. It's quite interesting, the subtext to this major public school, which you can only get into if you are a wizard or a witch, which is a genetic thing. So there's public school system, jolly hockey sticks, and all that, and then there's various evil people that they fight. And it's interesting her hatred of the lower middle class as well. So they live with this family because he's a mixed race. Is Harry Potter? He's half wizard and half...
he's Muggle. Is a half Muggle, right?
Muggle, right? Yeah, half Muggle.
Yeah.
And so he lives with his mum's sister, whatever, and they're like lower middle class. And they live in a horrible new 1950s semi-detached house, and you can tell somewhere in Surrey, and you can tell her disdain for the lower middle classes. And he lives under the stairs in a it's all very.
So Harry Potter is actually a narcissistic fantasy about imagining that you're really special when you're maybe not.
Yeah, that's probably that's probably why kids like it. That's why it is all these weirdos like Harry Potter, because they could imagine.
Yes, I was one of them. I was definitely one of them.
They're special. And I went to Harry Potter World in Watford. It's this massive aircraft because my parents thought my kids would like it.
Oh, okay.
So we went a couple of years ago. So we went to Harry Potter. It's an aircraft hangar, huge, and it's got all of the stuff that was. Obviously, it hasn't got Durham Cathedral in it. But it's got like various things though I did go into Durham Cathedral while they were filming it because I was allowed to, because I was allowed to go to the theology library, which was in the cathedral, and they covered the quadrangle with snow, and then they were doing this scene in the rafters again and again. That scene in the first one where they run away from a big dog or something.
So you have watched it. You have watched it.
I've watched it. Yeah, I've watched at least the first one. And I've read Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, and I've read to my children the first one, and it's bollocks, and you just and it's just made up shit, and it's not even funny. Like, at least with Roald Dahl, it's funny, and so I can't be bothered with it. And yeah, you can imagine this sort of weirdo freak child thinking, oh, I'm a bit like Harry Potter. oh yeah, I'm a bit special. I'm a muggle. And then you go to this place in Watford, and it's not. They identify. There were these people. There were people, undergraduates, obviously, walking around wearing the uniform of the school, wearing academic gowns and things like this, with the markers of.
Oh, you mean like the Comic-Con type events?
Yeah. And you're like, oh
Yes.
God, you've never had a girlfriend, have you? And
I've been to many of those.
Yeah,
But I have an excuse. It's not because I wanted to go necessarily. It's because my wife is an actress in one of those big franchises, so I would go with her sometimes. That's my excuse.
Right, and then you had some girls. There was a group of 3 girls. I'm guessing they were about 21. I'm guessing they were students, and they were so excited, way more excited than my very young children that were at the time. And they were wearing the gowns and whatever. And I thought, my God, I bet your left arm is a lattice of cuts. You know, I was just, it was just appalling. Appalling.
Isn't your wife Luke Skywalker's mother, Mark?
My wife is Luke Skywalker's aunt that raised him.
Aunt that raised him. Sorry, yes, yes, that's right. Yeah. Yes.
And Beru Whiteson.
That's right. Yes.
But I will tell you, I mean, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but I mean, the first one of these events I went with her was in Mexico City, and we walked into the convention center. Security met her, and the next thing she was whisked away. And the next thing I saw, and I was just left there because I was nobody. The next thing I saw, Darth Vader and 20 stormtroopers marching her into this massive auditorium. And when they got in there, that the crowd just went insane. And I was like, this is fucking weird. And that was my introduction to that world.
They had a thing.
Star Wars.
I don't like Star Wars. But it's made up.
Come on.
I like it to be based in reality. So I saw this film last night.
There is no reality in film. There's no reality in film.
I like it. If it's based on a true story, I can just about deal with it. There was a film last night with what's her name, who gets her kit off always, Nicole Kidman, and that guy Russell Crowe, and I think that was his name. And is that his name? Or was he the one that died? I don't know. But anyway,
Russell Crowe's alive.
All right, so Russell Crowe and Nicole Kidman, and it's based on a true story, and it's about a Christian fundamentalist couple in Kansas, was it Kansas or somewhere, one of these states, and they send their son to a gay conversion camp, and it's on Netflix, and it's based on a true, and of course all the men that run the camp are in the closet gays, obviously, fundamentalist Christian in the closet gays. And the man in charge of the camp is a fundamentalist Christian in the closet gay. And the idea is that he persuades you via various cult-like means, essentially. It's like Alcoholics Anonymous, which is cult-like. To the homosexuality, it's just a behavior. It's a behavior that you choose, the sinful behavior. Stop choosing it. And it's just about that. And it's very good.
Which we know is not true. Ed, are you a fan of Lawrence of Arabia, the film?
I haven't seen it. I should perhaps see it.
What?
Good Lord.
Weirdly, I did
time to see it.
I weirdly did once meet Peter O'Toole and held his pint.
You have to watch his film. It's great.
Signed my autograph book.
That's amazing.
I was about 16. He was completely pissed. He came out with a thing called TFI Friday, which they used to have with Chris Evans on Friday nights in the late 90s, mid to late 90s. But I've so met the guy. No, I haven't. I should watch that actually. Lawrence of Arabia.
Another film I recommend, and maybe you've both seen it, but the Bridge Over the River Kwai.
I have seen that. Yeah, that is
the
true.
film.
I didn't like the ending. The ending just sort of tailed off.
Really?
I
thought it was profound. I thought it was so interesting about somebody that loses their way, and they're so driven by their creation that they in essence lose their morality. That their morality just becomes about the thing I built, not the human beings. I thought that was fascinating.
I liked the episode of Top Gear, Bridge Over the River Cock, and they found this river in the same country called the River
Apropos
Cock.
of nothing.
And they then built a bridge over it. Yeah, that was, and so they could get cars over the bridge. That was the.
I don't know that we can go up from here. I think this is. Yeah.
I'll drink to that.
So are you still on gin and tonic? It looks like wine.
It's gin and tonic.
You know what they've done in Finland now? That Finland will eventually be a real grown-up country that can be where people can take responsibility for their own alcohol consumption. So some years ago, about 30 years ago, you could only buy alcohol in one state-run shop called Alko. That was it. And then they liberalised the laws so that you could buy beer and cider in like supermarkets, but anything stronger, wine or whatever spirits, you could only buy an Alko. And now they've changed the law so that you can buy wine with which is like 8.5% or less proof, so weak wine, in the normal shops. So this is, and eventually I'm hoping that they will just let Finns just buy alcohol at supermarkets like in all other countries.
They do that. They do that in Sweden. I couldn't believe it when I went to Sweden. You have to go to a special government designated shop in order to buy alcohol.
That's right. And the only way, if you go on holiday and you like a wine that you've tasted when you're in Greece or something, then you go back and the only way you can get it in Finland is to then write to the government and say, please, can you sell the Chateau Margaux or something?
Weren't they Vikings once? What happened? I mean, these are the Vikings we're talking about.
Vikings.
All of the Wellard violent people, they all left. And they went to northern England and spawned people like me and Richard. And then literally, because both me and Richard are descended from Rollo the Ganger, first Duke of Normandy, who founded the Dukedom of Normandy, who was a Viking. So in my case, I have the same, like linearly, it's the same Y chromosome. But in his case, via his great grandfather. But yeah. So there is actually a model. There is actually a theory on this. There's actually a study that was published which argued, and I think presented statistical evidence for it, that basically all the violent people got the hell out of Scandinavia and went to Russia or went to Britain or went to Normandy.
But why did they leave?
Because it was so bloody cold. So you had this warm period where they move into these kinds of places, like what is now Norway and Sweden and Denmark and whatever. And then there
was no warm period. This is the warmest period we've ever had. What do you mean? I jest.
No. It's been much warmer than this. I mean, if you go back to the medieval warm period, which was up to about from about maybe 900 to about 1300, something like that. They were growing grapes in northern England.
Mm-hmm.
That's why. Yeah, when they discovered Greenland, they called it Greenland for a good reason. And the Norse settled in Greenland because it wasn't that cold.
We don't talk about the medieval warming period.
The climate changes. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, the climate changes.
God,
very
careful. You be careful saying things like that.
Very, very significantly. But by the way, if you're British and you're living in the constituency, I interviewed a very interesting chap called Piers Corbyn on my channel. I haven't published the interview yet. But if you are living in whichever constituency he's standing in, I can't remember. I could check actually. Where's my phone?
Don't disappear. Don't disappear. And he's gone. Oh, and he's back. He's gone. No. Oh, he's gone.
Oh, he's gone. Oh, he's back. No, I'm back. Then do vote for Piers Corbyn if you're standing in wherever it is. He's standing. I can't remember where it is. But yeah, it does. And so, for example, you get this stupid program which my son could DVD with, and they use AI to recreate dinosaurs and whatever. And then you get this guy, and it's like he's like a sort of a zoologist, and he goes back in time, and I'm in the Triassic, and he interacts with the dinosaurs. It's quite a good program. It's quite interesting, except that he wouldn't have been able to breathe, would he? Because the reason why those animals got so big was because there was so much oxygen in the atmosphere that the only way they could avoid oxygen poisoning was to grow big. And so this guy would get oxygen poisoning and he'd die. A human being. I
love how that's your concern. That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's not realistic. It's not.
So you can't really suspend disbelief when you're watching things.
No, I can suspend disbelief within reason. So I can't. I watched the interview. Well, I didn't watch it. I watched some of it, and there was this bit that you cut because for whatever reason. But the point is that is an example of what I mean. That I can't have that. I can't have you can't. How can you suspend disbelief if you're being got at? If you know you're being got at by some ideology, it's very hard to suspend disbelief. And it's only a step from that to glaring historical inaccuracies. And that makes me not suspend disbelief. So if I know, for example, that Lady Jane Grey and Lord Guilford Dudley hated each other, then if they make a film called Lady Jane with Helena Bonham Carter and Kerry Ouse in 1985, and they make out that, oh, they fell in love and whatever, and it was all lovely. No, they didn't. And so that, for me, that ruins the film. They
just look at the pretty dresses in the countryside, but they didn't. They didn't.
They go out into the countryside and meet peasants that have been branded for stealing or whatever, and
they didn't.
They didn't. They spent the whole of the reign in the Tower.
I think you should write a book called "The Irritations of Professor Dutton." And it should be about all these inconsistencies.
It would be lengthy.
Fiona Taylor says that she loved that film. I also loved that film, Fiona Taylor, the first time I watched it, and then I looked into it and discovered what lies it was full of, and then that was it. I couldn't really watch it as much after that. There was all. I mean, for example, Fiona Taylor, when they executed Guilford Dudley, they dragged his body before Jane. That would have been an interesting scene. That's what they did. They dragged his beheaded body before Jane so she could see it. That's not in the film.
And what was her reaction, do you suppose?
She was all like, oh, it's blood. Oh no. Oh, my husband hasn't got a head.
I think that Richard's decompensating, just so you know.
Oh, I've got to get that gin in before I spit it back out.
Oh no. He's got a head.
Have you tried going for the clinical diagnosis for autism? Have you been tested?
I did. The doctor said I had some traits, but like I'm far too pro-social and whatever to do.
I can't deal with the lying. It's not factually accurate.
Shame. It's a damn shame. You know, I'd love to be on the grievance hierarchy in that way, but sadly, I'm not. I just have to. Well, the part of it, as you know, is deliberate. I mean, I could not say base things, but I just choose to say them, or do I? I don't know. But no,
it's an impulse control issue.
Is it? Yeah, it's also a psychopathology issue. But it is true.
You're defiant. You're very defiant and oppositional. I think that's where you.
Am I?
Yes,
I'm not as defiant and oppositional as a certain person that was a speaker at the conference.
Listen, now you stop that right there, young Mr. Dutton. Stop it right there. Now, what were we talking about? The weather. The weather.
Bad films. I do think that every effort should. I have toyed with the idea that it should be a criminal offence to knowingly portray historical inaccuracy in a film. But
how should they be punished?
By whatever the going punishment was in the period where the film is set.
So whatever the punishment was for lying, they should endure that.
That would be the punishment. Yeah. So you'd have to be really careful making films set in certain periods of history. Like if you made a film about King Draco, where all crimes were punished by death. And it was historically inaccurate in some way, then you'd be impaled on a spike.
Death.
So that would be, you'd have to be really careful making.
This is a good reality show, actually, that you're describing. You know, filmmakers are brought to trial for inaccuracies, and then the end of every episode is them, you know, either having something cut off or being put to death.
Or whatever the punishment would be in the specific. So let's say they made a film. They made a film about a public school in the 50s or 60s, and it was historically inaccurate, and they were lying. So then they'd have to be stripped naked, covered in ink and treacle, and flogged on the gluteus maximus until blood was drawn. So
you seem to be enjoying this idea.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent idea. I think you should look into, Mark, if some of your colleagues in Hollywood could funding for this, and so we would get, I don't know, what's like a recent, like that film 12 Years a Slave, for example. That was very historically inaccurate, and B, drawing upon a source that was written by a white person and was probably inaccurate itself. So whereas there are other slave narratives that are much more accurate. So they like Gone with the Wind. So they could They could. No, I just. That was slightly
We
inaccurate.
dodged one laser beam and then jumped straight onto the
So-
landmine.
I was thinking, oh my God, here he goes.
It was such a
No,
good
but
backflip there as well.
like roots or whatever. But even with roots, there's an inaccuracy at the beginning where they make out that they just get onto the land and just abduct people. That's rubbish. Those people would have
Which is
been
nonsense.
would have
That's
lost
very annoying.
wars with other African groups, and they would have been sold into slavery. So
Yeah.
if they could just portray, history is so fascinating, and I think it's more fascinating if you portray it reasonably accurately. I mean, I appreciate you have
100% agree.
so you have some
should.
things you have to do. I mean, you can't present medieval England in medieval English unless you want to do like a weird thing like what Mel Gibson did with that Jesus film and have them speaking in Aramaic or whatever. But that's just complicating life, isn't it? No, Jesus had an American accent. We all know that. And so just make it reasonably accurate. I don't know why it's such a problem, but it is increasingly a problem.
I think there's a good line to follow here, which is they're struggling so much with creativity in Hollywood now, and all we really need is historically accurate films. The actual history is so fascinating. Why are you rebooting Batman and Superman again and again? Let's have some historical accuracy and really force the filmmakers to be historically accurate. It'd be fascinating.
The reason is because 12 people make the decisions in Hollywood. 12.
Well, those 12 people need to be brought on our reality TV show, and
That people would pay to watch.
Bastardo.
Because they're all
So
billionaires.
blood
They're billionaires, and I think that the populist people would enjoy a spectacle like that.
I better turn to we have some questions we haven't answered. So,
Oh, God.
Low Mercury Tuner says to me, I heard Ryan Falk say Britain had the economic and military resources to keep India after World War II if they wanted to. But how do you keep control over a population of 400 million people if they don't want you to? What do you think? Well, the policy was divide and rule, to subdivide it into numerous sub kingdoms, and to get sort of pliant local maharajas to persuade them to toe the line. But I suppose if you just keep them rich, the economy is stupid, as Bill Clinton said, and that might have worked. But I don't know. He also asked me how much of what I find good looking is determined by genes. I've looked into that. I can't find any sort of correlational analysis. It's only that a significant component of what you find good looking is determined by genes, and the same genes that determine what you find good looking also determine your height. Which is interesting because it shows you that the way that height has become co-correlated with other adaptive genetic traits. And then Bell Beaker Groiper says Alexander the Great died on 10th of June 323 BC. He rejected the Chad or autistic Aristotle's ethnocentric views and tried creating a multi-culti empire, which fell. He lived hard, died young. You're saying he's a fast history strategist. Yeah, he certainly had elements of fast life history strategy, although perhaps he was group selected and thus helped to spread Greekness around the globe, which he did, because by the time he finished, I mean, they were speaking Greek in Egypt, for God's sake. I mean, Cleopatra's was Greek. So that's true, actually. Alexander the Great, realistic films. I mean, so much is there in history. And you don't need to make up, like that film Gladiator, you don't need to make up relationships that aren't there. And he's turned his camera off. Look, he's got upset.
I'm here.
He's there, but he's turned his camera off.
We can't see you, dear. It just says El Gato.
What happened?
Oh, I thought you were
become a disembodied voice.
I thought you were picking your nose or something like that.
What happened?
I don't know. The camera's gone off. Yeah, Alexander the Great would be, and now it's still gone off. Your camera's got unplugged, basically. I think that's what happened.
Well, I'm still here. I'm still here.
You're still here. It would be good if you had a sort of emoticon of your face, like, or something like that, or your coat of arms, and it would move. But you don't. Ed, you're wrong. Harry wasn't a Muggle. Both his parents were wizards. He lived with Muggles. Well, how's that the case? Hang on, wait, stop. So that genealogically, so both his parents were wizards. But by like genetic chance, his aunt wasn't. Oh, I see. Is that what you're saying? So his aunt wasn't a wizard. So it's like half and half a thing. So that means his mum's parents must have been half and half. Is that how it works? Is it passed on like that? Like it's an either or thing? Is that how it was? Wizardness is one gene, and you either have it or you don't. Like Huntington's syndrome. Is that what is
I
that?
think you either have it or you don't. I think.
Right. So the only way then that his aunt could be a non-wizard would be if, and why would she be so shocked then? They almost make out the aunt is shocked, but the aunt was brought up by one parent who was a wizard, and I'm sure they accused Harry Potter of being a muggle in it. And there's the sort of obviously Nazi evil house, Slytherin, where they're all about purity and they don't like muggles and stuff like this. So I'm sure there are people that have written a great deal on this utter nonsense of Harry Potter. But someone tell me, do you remember, Mark? You've read it?
A long time ago. I grew up since then, I guess.
I thought he was half something, and that was why he was persecuted. But maybe I got that.
Yeah,
wrong.
I thought Harry Potter's a film about traumatic brain injury. It starts with the head scar. Oh, yeah, that's true. There is an element of that, isn't there? Yeah, maybe that's why he's charismatic, because of the traumatic brain injury. Yeah, because I know when I was at university, I used to go to the spiritualist church because I did this fieldwork project on them, and I was talking to this guy that was one of the spiritualists, and he said that when he was about 7, he was knocked over in the playground, hit his head really hard, and then thereafter he could like see the dead and hear their voices. It was obviously a brain injury.
I only started YouTubing effectively after a traumatic brain injury from martial arts.
How did you change after this brain injury?
Well, I wasn't aware of any of the changes. People around me told me that I became a bit more aggressive, which I found shocking.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
And you adopted a Liverpudlian accent.
Yeah, I just made it up. I'm not from there. I'm from Surrey.
Yeah, no, you are from there, but you're from the posh bit, aren't you? From the Wirral. Posh.
I'm from the Wirral. From the Wirral.
Posh Scouse. Okay, I'd like to round up, chaps. So it's been a pleasure speaking to Mark, and I do subscribe to his channel, and you can follow him on Twitter. And Mark, what are you up to? So you tell the assemble where can they watch your series about the old?
The series was it was on HBO, so I'm not sure in the UK where you can watch it. I'm sure it's somewhere. Just look up The Vow, not the romantic. The romance film. It's a 2-part series, 2-season series. And then the things I'm doing at present, obviously my podcast, which is WTF is on my mind, which stands for in case you don't know what the fuck is on my mind. And then I'm finishing off a film right now on narcissism and narcissistic abuse, which I should have completed this year. And then I'm also working on another series at the moment about a cult, yet another cult. And then I have a whole bunch of other things in the works. But you can find me on Instagram, Twitter. My website is www.markvicente.com. That is where I am.
Excellent. And you know where you'll find Richard, because I've already told you. So I won't be here next week, chaps, because I'm going to be in Bulgaria. But I shall be back on the day of the election, where you will find me on the Lotus Eaters at some point talking about that. And then the following Monday. So see you all soon, chaps, and goodbye.